One of the things I've been talking about lately in regards to this national divorce movement is what I call the small country problem. This is an aspect of it I hadn't talked about before, but let me recap what I see as a small country problem. Now, first, if you look at what some people on in the new right are beginning to talk about is this idea of almost splitting up into uh, a Holy Roman Empire like entity with many small countries encompassed in it, not unlike the buffer area between France, Prussia, and Austria, where some 450 minor German countries existed. And then more popularly spoken of as national divorce, the idea of the United States splitting into two or more entities, nations. Now, my general problem with this, and mind you, to clarify, I'm not against the idea of national divorce. Um, I don't think it will work like people hope it will. And just to recap, my idea is that small nations tend to be the plaything of big nations unless uh, they have some huge geographical advantage or they're willing to placate the bigger nation by giving in on certain things. Take, for instance, like Switzerland. It's a small nation, neutral, pretty much the idea of an independent country, but at the same time, it capitulates to U.S. demands on its banking system. So its size seems to be a problem. Its geographical isolation doesn't help it in that case. The other issue is assuming the idea of a blue and a red America. The blue America is made up of the people who have a nonstop, constant urge to control everything around them. These are the people who, as the United States abroad in every country in the world, messing with their political systems from top to bottom, attempting to alter the way their governments operate, trying to control their governments via uh, basically government monetary handout programs, attempting to alter their culture. So the question would be is if a blue and red America existed, is it plausible to believe that the blue America would leave the red America alone? And worse yet, if there were multiple entities, would the remainder of blue America even have more ability to basically mess around with the various splinters of the other parts of America? The situation could almost end up being worse than what we have now. So, the chart I've got alongside of me here is essentially the countries that have space launch capability as of 2022 and the various degrees that they have them. Now, our top three, the ones that can actually put payloads into orbit at a fairly reasonable pace, they can get them out to pretty good distances. They actually have the ability to uh, explore uh, via automated probes distant planets. They have the ability of manned spaceflight. I think the biggest similarity between these three is size, and size being both a population and uh, land mass issue. Now, obviously, there's probably a lot of other things at play, but the top three have a lot of things not in common with each other. in terms of how their governments work, etc., etc. Now, I think it's pretty clear to say that the United States, although it faltered a little bit in the 90s and early 2000s, I think it's getting recognized that we're rapidly in the leadership of space once again. And I think part of this comes from the size, basically having a huge landmass to work with in the first place. Uh, and it's not just merely that you have the ability to launch from someplace remote and not have to worry about dealing with injuring people when inevitable accidents occur. Because I mean, even the European Space Agency launches from South America. I believe they still do in Guyana. So they essentially use remote areas. Any wealthy nation that lacked places for actual launch would very easily be able to talk a poorer country into using itself as a launch base. There's probably numerous African nations that would probably be in the region of the equator that would probably make great launch sites. But none of these wealthy countries go to any particular effort to try to build a launch facility there. So I don't necessarily think it's the availability of space in a country that's the issue. I think the size of the country just kind of alters the way people look at the world. Um, Europeans, the world is very small to them. Europeans, many times, if they come to the United States, are awestruck when they realize that they can't travel between places that seemingly should be places you could get to in like a day or two, whereas you can't go from Florida to Hollywood in any meaningful amount of time, or not an instant amount of time, not like you could on the European continent. So I think size changes your scope of how you look at things. I think one of the things that makes the United States a standout on this is the idea of our original immigrant stock, especially coming up through probably the mid 1900s. And you have to look at the kind of people who were willing to leave where they were and come to the United States at that time. Uh, like you're talking about 1700s and 1800s, you're talking about people who you're saying, okay, well, you're living in a place that's relatively comfortable and relatively safe, and you have the option of going to this place that isn't safe. That's very dangerous, and the only thing we can guarantee you is if you go over there and claw out your own chunk of land, that you can modify it any way you want and make it absolutely yours, and there's going to be nobody there telling you what to do. But at the same time, it's so horribly dangerous. Uh, there's hostile natives. There are wild animals. There's disease. There are extreme weather events, and you will not have the support of civilization that you're used to. And yet, a lot of people did choose this. Okay, this I like to think of as kind of a spirit of daringness, and I think this spirit uh, did transfer down the generations a bit. I mean, obviously, as things get more and more comfortable and civilized, and there's less of a sense of I'm willing to just give up everything around me for an idea of something I want to make. I mean, that goes away, but I don't think it goes away instantly with everyone. So that's why I think a certain thought process existed in the United States, the so called rugged individual and such. I think why we're beginning to lose that in this country comes from the idea that we don't have a place to go, really. I mean, if you were to think about a place you could go to where you could just carve out your own little niche and do your own thing, um, there's not a whole lot of places you can head off to. There's not a lot of people, a lot of governments around the world inviting people to come in and do something like that. So I think uh, there's a danger here. Now, if you talk to someone like Elon Musk, his big concerns are one, the idea that some global extinction event will come along. And that's something to be very concerned with. He's also concerned about climate change, but his concerns are a little bit more sane than your average planet hugger. I'm concerned about the extinction of this daring spirit. What happens typically when we see people getting more and more crowded is it appears to be human nature to abhor watching people do things exactly the way they want. Someone always wants to control it. You know, they look over at someone else's yard and they don't like the way they're doing things. And they'll come up with excuses. Oh, they're lowering our property values, or they're drawing in the wrong element of people, or they're making the rest of us look bad, or whatever it is. But I do think there is this human nature to want to do this. And I think if people who really don't like living under that situation where other people are there telling them what to do, if they get a place to go, they strongly consider going there, obviously weighing the risks. So, one of the things I consider very critical to the survival of the human race, not as a biological entity, but as this being with this spark, this drive, I think that's in danger of extinction before the actual biological unit of humanity is in danger of extinction. So I consider the opening of space for eventual colonization a critical element in the survival of not just humanity, but the important part of humanity, the movers and drivers who are at the fringe, the ones who will uh, keep humanity vibrant and moving forward. So one of my big concerns becomes is if the United States seems to be the best place for a functional space program that gets the kind of results we're getting, and in addition seems to be finally fostering a private space launch program that in many ways is almost rivaling the national program. And this private entrepreneurship does not seem to be occurring anywhere else but the United States. Please correct me if there is similar movements going on in Europe, and I can almost guarantee there aren't in Russia and China. So if we break the United States up into two or more pieces, do we also lose the ability to get to space in a reasonable amount of time? Do we close the door for future colonization? And that's another concern I have in terms of this whole national divorce debate. Um, I think, I mean, because you can make arguments about that perhaps these smaller entities might become more affluent, but the question is if you reduce your population to a point, does it lose some kind of critical tipping point where it has the kind of capital to do space launch? Because you can look at, there's numerous little enclaves around the world, like Singapore, Hong Kong, which have a bigger per capita wealth than the areas around them. But the thing is, they're also, so you might live well there, but at the same time, they don't have this ability to produce grand things, uh, earth shaking things. We see only those coming out of large nations. So that's food for thought on it. Again, I'm not against national divorce. I'm highly skeptical of it, and I'm wondering if the results will be better than what we currently have. So in the comment section below, tell me what you think. Can space, uh, can a space program, and not necessarily just a national one, but can private space continue in a country that's smaller than the United States currently is? Will it be as vibrant? Will it be a potential gateway to the planets for humanity? And if you do know anything about private space launch going on in other countries, I'd be interested in what you know about that. All right, please consider hitting the like button. If you came across this video via the YouTube algorithm, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you know somebody who might find this interesting, please share it with them. And I thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.